it's dramatically affecting kids. They see the type of effort, the type of resources that are being put into their schools, into their classrooms, and they're associating that with their internal value.
What impact does identity have in the classroom?
You know, identity plays a really big role in education, and I don't think it's actually taken with the amount of severity that it needs to be, because it's often overlooked, right? Like, we're here at school to learn math and science, and we don't really take into consideration how much our identity plays in not only the learning that we're doing, but also the learning environments that we're creating. And so oftentimes what we ask of students is just to show up as a learner, just show up as a student, but we're not asking them to show up with their whole selves. They're so much more than just being a student. They're also a son or a daughter or the oldest sibling or a soccer player or, you know, a swimmer. They have interests like gaming or writing or drawing. And so when we ask them to just show up as just a student, we are asking them to shed away some of these other things that are very important for them, for not only their learning, but also their life development. And so that constitutes in the classroom, how it shows up in the classroom is you have teachers who are not attending to these different identities that students are bringing in with them. And there's a lack of engagement because students are trying to make this connection, like, how does this relate to me?
Right.
How does this relate to my life and what I want to do overall?
Right.
And it doesn't. Because we haven't attended to it. And also there's a neglect on teachers' parts to recognize how their own identity shapes the classroom environment and how those identities can be conflicting. So we already know that in America we are a browning country, we have more students of color, and teachers are are in classrooms that mostly don't look like them, right?
Yes.
And so if I'm coming in with this lens, this cultural lens, with my identity and teaching this style and doing practices that resonate with me, I have to be cognizant of the fact of who might be left out of this conversation, who might be left out of this space or not be feeling like they belong because I haven't actually attended to or know or acknowledge the other identities that are in our classroom.
How does one shed those identities? How do you start to peel back those layers so that the kids can show up just as students? Is it taught in the classroom? Is it taught at home? Because mom is telling them to do one thing, dad is telling them to do one thing, so they show up with all of these different identities, like you said. How do kids or teachers help the student shed those identities so that they can show up just as a student?
So I don't even think it's I don't think it's an issue of shedding. I actually think it's how can we make a space that is inclusive enough that allows those identities to exist in the classroom. And there's different pedagogical practices, there's different types of curriculum that can be open-ended enough where I say, I really want you to learn this standard. And there's more than one way to skin a cat. There's more than one path to an outcome. And so how can you, with your unique style, with your unique opinions and perspectives on life, and your unique skill set and background knowledge, how can you come and attack this problem from your standpoint with all of the identities attached? And so it's not about shedding the identity, because that just adds for more exclusion, that adds for more lack of sense of belonging for our students. It's how can I create an environment that encompasses that, that allows that to exist in this classroom.
Can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I am a research director at the UCLA Center for the Transformation of Schools. I'm also the founder of the Liberatory Classroom, which is, I like to call it just like a design studio where I work with teachers and professionals on their equity-based projects that they have for their classrooms and for their schools, whether that be building curriculum, changing our discipline practices, or having more revitalizing type of PD where teachers can actually implement some of the things that they're learning around cultural responsiveness, equity, diversity, and inclusion.
You know, we just got out of a pandemic. COVID kids are back in school. What do you think is the number one problem children and teachers and even parents are facing in school today?
Wow. That's a huge, that's a huge question. The number one problem, I think having a curriculum that's actually in a classroom that's actually relevant and meaningful. We have standards, we have like standardized tests that we give, but I don't know how much of our K-12 education system actually prepares students for the life that they're about to enter.
Right.
We do a great injustice and we do a great disservice to thousands, hundreds of thousands of kids every single year when they graduate below grade level, without knowing how to do their taxes, without having any idea of savings account, without having any idea of investments, without having any idea of how to navigate complex systems that we have instituted as a society. Mm-hmm. And so we are very hell-bent on making sure that we get through a standard curriculum in a year, but not necessarily with focused on and in tune with what is the skills and knowledge that this student is going to need to get through life.
Absolutely.
So just general life skills, and some of those things that I mentioned are prioritized for different social economic classes, mm-hmm. right? Like mm-hmm. other students, they'll have a bank account and savings, and they'll have a tax guy, mm-hmm. and they'll know mm-hmm. How to invest their money because it'll come from their community or their family.
Absolutely.
But we already know that, two things, or for Black people, we always say there's two things that are always going to be true. I'm going to be Black and I'm going to have to pay taxes, right? And so I'm going to have to do that all the time. And so the fact that we don't teach these basic life skills in school in a
today.
Place that we're mandating students to be for 12 years,
yes.
12 formative years
yes.
of their life.
Yes.
And what do they get out of it? And the fact that the truth of the matter is that a lot of kids get more harm. A lot of kids get filtered into our policing and our prison systems because of their engagement with the K-12 system. Mm-hmm. And so that, I think, is one of the biggest issues. How can we at the very least do less harm? Because you're going through this mandated system. Mm-hmm. And if mm-hmm. we're going to mandate it, it should at least be some type of benefit. And so what type of life skills yes. am I going to give you that will advance your access to freedom and your opportunity and the skills and knowledge to actually to use that freedom for your benefit?
Right.
Right.
Today there are, I think everyone knows that there's a shortage of teachers.
Right.
Schools are recruiting and even changing the way that they hire teachers, not requiring the 4-year or the mm-hmm. 6-year degree just to get the teachers in the classroom. And how is that affecting the students today?
Yeah, I think you see it with when we're changing the standards for even to qualify for a teacher. A lot of times, look, we just did this, data was just released in California actually around this topic of subpar credentials and placement. So what we found is that, no surprise, the lowest or the lowest socioeconomically placed schools have the most subpar credentialed teachers. So these are teachers that either have a credential in a different subject than the subject that they're teaching, or have an emergency credential, or have no credential at all, but are just like intern replacement teachers for the time being, because we have a massive shortage. Mm-hmm. It's dramatically affecting kids. They see the type of effort, the type of resources that are being put into their schools, into their classrooms, and they're associating that with their internal value, mm-hmm. right? How much care is this city or even this country is going to be placing in my education lets me know how they feel also about me. And the truth of the matter is, across the board, we're not making this. I wish I could just attribute this to the pandemic, right? Like, oh, teaching became really, really hard during those 2 years where we were virtually teaching, and that has caused a wave of teachers to leave. Yes, but also we've been facing a teacher shortage for years now. And that's because of a couple of things. You know, it's not financially as stable as it used to be. And so the compensation, we continuously are fighting for teachers to get a pay increase, but that could look a whole host of different ways, right? It could be a monetary value, an increase in their actual salary. It could be an increase in their retirement. It could be a tax cut for teachers. It could be housing stipends. Like there's different ways that we can incentivize more people to go into the teaching profession. But above all, we already know that also the teaching profession is not respected and not given as much respect as it needs to be for the type of work that it does. The entire economy runs off of K-12 education. Seriously, not only do we educate everyone who is going into various professions for our entire society to run, but in order for our entire family structures to work, in order to have the two-parent household that has a dual income, you need some type of support that is caring for students during those formative years.
Right.
So mom or dad can't leave to go to work if someone has to be at home watching the kids during the day. And so our school system not only is responsible for educating these students, but it's also responsible for caring for these students while we're generating our economy for the country. And so if we realize that this is and we realized this in the pandemic, that teachers are essential workers, that schools are essential places that are institutions that need to be up and running in order for us to have our society as normal. And so if that's the case, then we need to start paying and compensating and respecting this profession as such. And it just doesn't, it's not registering this way at the state level, definitely not at the federal level, which is crazy because again, we're mandating it for all American citizens to go through this process and to be in part of these institutions. And so we should be compensating and also shoring up that we have that teachers who decide, or people who decide to take on this profession, are taken care of. They can provide for their own family, they can save for their own retirement, they can provide for their kids to go to college, and we don't do that. And so until we do that, no one's going to be, you know, jumping. If I can
to become a teacher.
Like I can make $1 million on YouTube. Why am I?
Absolutely.
But you want me to educate the world's children? No. And so the job is not going to get easier. And so if the job is not going to get easier, then we need to make sure that the compensation and the incentive to do this work is there.
How ready are our white teachers? How ready are they to combat the students that don't look like them? I mean, when I grew up, all of my teachers were white, but I remember them being caring teachers for me, the brown girl. But today, the teachers are more so, they want every child to act the same and be the same. And I don't think that's something that's possible. How do you get the teachers ready that don't look like the students? How do you ready them and get them to have that care again, caring for the students, caring about the education that they're delivering in the classroom?
And I will say that most teachers that go into this profession care about students. They don't go into it for the money. Definitely not for the accolades, definitely not for the hurrah. Like most people, when you're saying I'm going to go into the teaching profession or I'm going to be a teacher, they're like, oh, really? Is that what you want to do? Is that like, this is what you're getting your education for? It is the thankless job. And so I think it's not that they don't have the intention of caring, it's that we don't do a good job of preparing teachers to hold that capacity and that complexity of what care looks like, especially when you're encountering and having to engage with cultures that maybe you've never dealt with before, races you've never dealt with before, experiences and environments that you're just unfamiliar with. And so how do I come to this as an outsider and address it in the most equitable and caring and empathetic way? That's not something that we readily take. It's not a mandated part of our curriculum for teacher preparation programs. We prioritize in America, we prioritize content readiness. We prioritize a content expert. And so what we get from that is, and this started all the way back like when we were doing the space race, right? Like we had to focus on science, we had to focus on math because we wanted to get to space first. Mm-hmm. And we realized that as a country, we were woefully undereducated in those subject areas. And so that started the push for like, we need to have expert teachers, content knowledge expert teachers in our classrooms teaching our students. And that did raise the level of education in terms of that content knowledge, but what we lost in the process was the humanizing relational aspect
mm-hmm.
of education and like
mm-hmm.
the teacher to the student.
The nurturing part.
The nurturing part.
Mm-hmm.
Like 90% of your job as a teacher is connecting with other people.
Right.
And if you can't build that connection, there is absolutely no way.
Right.
There's absolutely
right.
no way you're going to be able to teach them. And so when we are preparing teachers, I think it would behoove us to make sure that our teacher preparation programs have a standard course or courses that is entrenched throughout all of the work, where we are talking about how do we engage with students, how do we cultivate a sense of belonging in our schools, how do we make sure that we're being culturally responsive and relevant, how do we make sure that we're taking time to evaluate and reflect on our practices to make sure that they're anti-racist, mm-hmm. right? And we don't do that. And so that would be the first part, is that even in their training, before they even get to step foot in the classroom, that they are being able to look at some of these things.
So can you tell me how much of teaching is personality, or is it more academic for the individual?
Right.
The person actually going to school, getting the degree.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it's more about who they are as a person, their personality, or is it strictly academic? They just want to teach.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it definitely makes sense. I think you have to have the personality. You have to have the desire and the drive to work with students, to work with other people, to be creative, to be challenged. Like that has to be innate with you. That has to be something that you want to spend your time doing. And then the education and the academic stuff bolster your ability to do that successfully and to do it efficiently. You can do anything. You could be a teacher and not like kids. I mean, I've met some.
Yes.
I've met some. But your success rate in terms of being able to connect with kids, your success rate in being what we qualify as a good teacher, goes down if you don't have that in you. And what we find is that, like, this is why we know that people like coaches, people like mentors,
yes.
That don't have the education would make great teachers. In California, we have a state-run grant for classified employees. It's a pathway because what we've realized is that, the lunch lady, the noon duty aides, the security guards, they are all great with the students. The students actually listen to them. The parents actually go to them first, mm-hmm. before they go to the principal, mm-hmm. before they go to the counselor. Mm-hmm. And the only thing that's preventing them from being in the classroom and making that impact more consistently is the fact that they don't have the certificate.
They don't have that certificate.
Right? And so
yes.
what we're doing in California is starting a pathway for, if you are one of these classified employees on a school campus, the state will help pay for you to get your degree, okay. To become a teacher. Because we know that half of the battle, more than half of the battle of being in this profession is having people who can relate to students, yeah. and to families.
Yeah.
And so I think that you don't have to have a degree to be a teacher. There are teachers.
I would agree with you. With that.
There are teachers that we have, mm-hmm.
in
our own personal lives every single day. My grandma's a teacher.
Yes.
My auntie's a teacher.
Yes.
Like, not in real life, but they teach me things
Absolutely.
Every single day, and it's because of that connection and the personality that they have.
Absolutely. I mean, we need our teachers that can teach math, and mm-hmm. we need our teachers that can teach science. But I mean, there are people who just have skills, innate skills that come across very well, connect with students, they
Right.
care, and they teach effortlessly.
Yeah.
And those are the ones that probably would be really great in a pathway to
Right.
getting a degree to become a teacher, opposed to someone who went to school, got a degree, I'm going to teach, don't really want to, but I'm going to because I need a paycheck.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to,
Yes.
I don't really like kids, but I had to go get my degree because my parents told me to,
Right.
instead of doing something that was innate within them.
I was doing this research study in Texas, and we were interviewing teachers. They were having, this one school district was having a huge problem with teachers leaving after their first 2 to 3 years. So they would be full on recruitment. They would recruit 110% of their capacity, but they knew that their retention rate was very low and very poor. And so we were just interviewing teachers. So why did you get into teaching? Why are you deciding to leave? Have you thought about leaving? And one of the big things that were coming up is that many of the teachers, they were attracted and incentivized to come to the state to teach because of the pay and because of the signing bonus. But their interest was solely in the subject,
Yes.
not necessarily in teaching. Like, I remember we were interviewing one teacher, and she was like, oh, I write books, and I love writing, and I wrote my first poetry book, and it didn't really go so well, and so I was looking for a job, and so I was like, well, I love writing and I love reading, why don't I just teach English?
Yes.
And even though that's a very valid way to come into the profession, and if you can get on board within that, you're going to have to deal with 30 to 150
different
little
identities.
little human beings that are counting on you to not only learn something,
Yeah.
but to validate them,
Yeah.
to validate their entire existence, right? If you can get on board with that, then however you find your way to this profession, fine. But a lot of times we are seeing that we have teachers who are, I really love science, and so I'm going to be a science teacher, but that's only half of it. You can love the subject, you can be an expert in the subject, and then having to actually distill that down and disseminate that down into the activities and the engagement with students is just different. It's different. And if you don't have that capacity, if you don't have that drive to do that,
You probably shouldn't be a teacher.
yes.